Hello there, my friend. Welcome back to History for Thinkers, a show that brings history to life and makes it easy to understand. In this episode, we are going to be continuing the Kampf analysis series. But before we get into that, I would like to ask you a question. I'll remind you again at the end, but here it is, right? When we finish this Kampf analysis series, what would you like me to cover next? I've already had someone request Hitler's Table Talks, so are you guys also interested in that? Or maybe something else? Maybe something that isn't World War II? Or maybe, just YOLO it, let's just go nonstop World War II all the time. I'm 100% game for that, guys. I was born for that job. So you let me know what you want to see after the Kampf analysis series, and we can see if we can make that happen. And I would also like to thank everyone over on Patreon for supporting the show. Guys, you make the whole world go around. Thank you so much for supporting history content. It means the world to me. And I hope you guys love the exclusive episodes over there. So if you also want some exclusive history content, maybe even get your name on the big screen like Matthew here, head on over to patreon.com/historyforthinkers. Now, with that being said, let's get into Kampf. So we left off talking about how the labor front back at Germany during World War I, they were going on strike, they were trying to get better living conditions, they were trying to get more food, and this was undermining the German military front, who, let's acknowledge, was doing really good in the trenches. Germany, they were a real enemy to be taken seriously at that time, and someone like Hitler, who was so adamant about their nationalism, who wanted Germany to win so bad, it just must have been so frustrating because it's like, oh hey, us soldiers, listen, we're out here fighting for you. We're trying to make the country better for you people. Why are you going on strike? And you can kind of hear some of his frustrations here. He says, quote, "Must the soldiers fight for victory while the home front goes on strike against it?" So you can just hear the anger in those words. He just must have been so mad about it. And of course, who's leading this whole thing? The Marxists, aka the Jews, right? So that's all going on. And I think it actually puts to rest a very typical claim about Hitler. And that is the very popular claim that Hitler is somehow left-wing. Now, there is a whole bunch of bickering and, people try to politicize the past and whatnot. I'm not necessarily here to put a spin on anything. I'm just here to make observations, and I also don't really have a side, left or right. I think there are good ideas on both. There are also bad ideas on both. So with that being said, here we have pretty clearly Hitler does not really care about the working class, labor conditions, which are typically left-wing causes. He instead wants the entire nation to be dedicated and organized around the war effort, right? I mean, he would eventually adopt the idea of Totalen Krieg, total war. Basically, the militarization of every piece of society. Every single person is somehow contributing to the war effort, and the war effort just keeps going on. We're going to invade everyone. That's going to be that. That was his whole thing. So people on the left are generally, of course there are exceptions, right? Let's acknowledge that. But generally the left is opposed to military force, expansionism, things like that, things of that nature. So when Hitler talks about how, these dang working class people who are going on strike trying to get better conditions so they can feed their kids, he's doing this, so us soldiers can go on and fight for the glory of the fatherland, right? I mean, it is very difficult to call someone like this left-wing and do so in good, honest faith. So I think that's a good little piece right here that kind of puts that whole thing to rest. So if someone ever makes this asinine claim that Hitler is somehow an ultra-lefty, left-wing, or he was a liberal, such crazy stuff people say. But if someone tries to say that kind of stuff, point them to page 158 in Kampf. That's all you're going to need to show them. And now we have come to an important part of the story. Because this is the part where Russia is defeated. Russia, the great bear of Europe, the big monster that everyone was a little scared of, finally pulled out of the war, and now they were having their own revolution. They were out for the count, and they were not coming back in, and that was very, very bad news for the Allies. Especially, Hitler mentions in here that you can really see how the Western Allies kind of hoped and relied on Russia to come through for them and be the victorious, person on the Western side. And that is very demoralizing when they pull out of the war, especially after all of their sacrifice. I mean, I just could not have imagined being a Russian fighting in World War I. I mean, any of the world wars, right? But World War I particularly, because you're poor, impoverished, you're a serf, your life is already miserable. I mean, just staying alive is rough. But now you're also asked to go and fight, and, I know there's that meme that they'll give one Russian soldier bullets, they'll give another one a gun. Whichever one gets shot first, just pick up the other guy's stuff, and there you go. It was not quite that bad, but it was very bad. I mean, there were people in the Russian military that were going out marching off with no shoes. Right? So, as much as we meme on it, as much as we joke about it, find it kind of funny, there was some really hardcore stuff going on. So all the sacrifice these people made for a loss, for their country to be defeated, for them to lose territory. I believe it was Trotsky who was leading the Brest-Litovsk meetings. So that was going on. They're giving up territory. They're like, all right, Germany, all right, we're out. You guys win. Just don't destroy us. Let us have our little revolution, and we'll be done. And that was that. So the Allies, right? America, the UK, France. I mean, they're all kind of looking on like, oh my God, what the heck are we gonna do now? And that was really a rough situation. And for all of Hitler's blind patriotic praise of the German soldier, because he has a lot of that in here. I mean, if you look at it like that, I mean, it's such a well-written little piece in a couple of chapters here. Whenever he talks about the German soldier, I mean, his praise is just like all the way up here, man. It is unbelievable. But all of that aside, he does kind of hit on something really important, and that's that Germany probably coulda, woulda, shoulda won. I think we've already discussed this a little bit, but they really had a serious chance. I mean, even he points out how the enemy propaganda, even they're getting scared. Even the idea of it being hopeless for Germany to win, that idea is kind of gone. They can't even print that anymore because people don't believe it. So Russia's out. I believe Italy is out at this time too. So now they don't have to worry about anyone other than the enemy in France. Now, of course, Germany does not win. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One of the big ones is going to be this German revolution, right? He talks about how the enemy propaganda starts talking about the Germany facing revolution, Allied victory is inevitable. It was not inevitable. The thing about it is, this revolution that went on in Germany was largely due to the British blockade, where they stopped supplies from going into Germany, who was largely reliant on foreign exports to feed their population. So Germany, for all its faults at this time, it was not self-sufficient, not self-reliant. It very much relied on international trade, right? Especially, we're in the age of early industrialization. So, and the countries that have really picked up on that trend are Germany, UK, France, and America. Those are the big four players. They're making factories, they're trading a lot, all these different things. And Germany is kind of reliant on other countries to feed their people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in peacetime, but it is a bad thing when it's wartime. Because depending on who you're getting fed from, right? I mean, they can easily say, oh, hey, we're not going to send you food anymore. Screw you. And then let's talk it out on the battlefield. There's always that possibility. But let's say, Germany was not reliant on like the UK for their food. That wasn't the case. But the problem was that the British stopped all imports into Germany. So no one could bring anything in there. So they were just starving. I mean, the amount of people that died, that starved to death back home in Germany, it's such an astronomical number. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people. I believe it was one of the German government one of the government organizations. Yeah, I think like the Department of Health, something like that. And they claimed that there were 800,000 civilians that starved to death. I mean, this is not soldiers. These are the people that are back at home, that are working in factories. Maybe they're kids, maybe they're women especially. And that became a big propaganda piece. Now, historians have kind of debunked it, that number is not actually 800,000 or whatever they claimed it was. It was much lower, but it was still very high, all things considered. I think the real number was around like somewhere between 200 and 400,000 people, which, oh my God, that is such a large number of people. Could you imagine? I mean, that's not war casualties. That is your own civilians starving to death. There's not enough food. There's not enough work to go around. There's not enough. I mean, enough of the society was mobilized for this war effort that, and let's not forget, this is a 4-year war. This is a long time. This is a very long time to go without your society or your country caring about your well-being. So all these people that started doing this German Revolution, they had been living this chaos, starvation, suffering, poverty. They had been dealing with this for, I don't think the entire 4 years, because I don't think the British blockade came in until about 1916. But still long enough that, I mean, you go long enough without food, you will do anything. You will betray your country and make it lose in a war if it means you get to eat, if it means you get to feed your kids. So that is just, you know what? It's such a tough situation because a lot of people, there's actually talk about whether or not this was a war crime by the British. Now, the British won this war, so we don't really talk about that. I do think it's important to recognize that the people that win wars are never recognized as war criminals. Very hypocritical. And I do feel it's important to point that out. But this was just a rough time. People, you will do anything to feed your kids. And the British knew that. So they starved Germany. And that was the cause for this revolution. Not, Hitler's going to claim for all these Marxist things. Like, no, people didn't really care about that stuff. I mean, even after Germany was only marginally left-wing in comparison to everyone else. And you would have thought that they would have been very left-wing, but they weren't. They just wanted to feed themselves. Hitler had been a really good soldier during the war. He fought really valiantly. He won a whole bunch of awards. He was very well respected with his comrades in the military. Now, toward the end of the war, around 1918, he was gas attacked. He was basically blinded for a short period of time, and they sent him to a hospital over in Pomerania, which is around modern-day Poland. So all the way back, away from the battle, away from the fighting, and he's recovering here. He's basically accepted that he's never going to be able to draw or paint or do architecture or any of that ever again. Like he's not expecting to get his sight back. He has accepted the fate that had befallen him. And just when he thought things could not get worse, this happens. Quote, on November 10th, the local pastor visited the hospital for the purpose of delivering a short address. And that was how we came to know the whole story. I was in a fever of excitement as I listened to the address. The reverend old gentleman seemed to be trembling when he informed us that the House of Hohenzollern should no longer wear the imperial crown, that the fatherland had become a republic, that we should pray to the Almighty not to withhold his blessing from the new order of things, and not to abandon our people in the days to come. In delivering this message, he could not do more than briefly express appreciation of the royal house, its services to Pomerania, to Prussia, indeed, to the whole of the German fatherland, and here he began to weep. A feeling of profound dismay fell on the people in that assembly, and I do not think there was a single eye that withheld its tears. As for myself, I broke down completely when the old gentleman tried to resume his story by informing us that we must now end this long war because the war was lost, he said, and we were at the mercy of the victor. The fatherland would have to bear heavy burdens in the future. We were to accept the terms of the armistice and trust to the magnanimity of our former enemies. It was impossible for me to stay and listen any longer. Darkness surrounded me as I staggered and stumbled back to my ward and buried my aching head between the blankets and pillow. I do actually think that this was a very serious event for him. For all of his insanity, for all of his later crimes and his faults, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there's so much to criticize, so many things that he did that were terrible. I think that this had a profound impact on him. I'm not sure how he would have acted, what his political views would have been after the war if Germany had won, or at the very least if Germany had not been forced to accept terrible agreements after the war. It really is, it's just so strange. I mean, a paragraph like this, I could just imagine having been a German. I mean, not even like a radical nationalist like Hitler was, but someone that was just like fairly patriotic. Someone that really looked up to and admired the monarchy that had been ruling the country for centuries. And it's just the way things had always been. And, where the German people were finally united. And then this happens. And I have to imagine that this must have been a historically traumatic event. That living through this, it made things more difficult than they had to be. And you know what, guys? I'm not trying to excuse the atrocities that go on, right? Like, I look for reasons, not excuses. But I do think that this entire event was really instrumental in changing history, in setting the course for the way things would be in World War II. It really is such a tragedy that there had to be a war at all. Because if the European diplomats of the day could have just found a way to not initiate a war, I mean, how many more millions of people, how much more could have been created? How much more could humanity have done if we hadn't killed millions of each other during this time period? It's a big loss that humanity faced during this time. And it only gets worse. It only gets worse. And then not even a page or so later, this terrible event that has gone on in Germany, this betrayal, this miserable defeat, this horrible time that they are now living through. Who is responsible? Who is the reason for this all? It's the Jews. It is the Jews. So this was really powerful propaganda. And, it really is going to be sad, especially for all of the Jews who had fought. I mean, could you imagine having been one of the thousands of Jews who had fought on the side of Germany in World War I, like fought valiantly? I mean, even the guy that gave Hitler the Iron Cross, that guy was Jewish. So all of these guys, they fought, they served, they pulled more, not just their weight, but more than their weight. I mean, if you look at the actual statistics from the time, Jews were, roughly 2 or 3% of the population, and they were a higher percentage of them in the military. So they were overrepresented in the military, not under. So they were serving, and well, of course, there's this big anti-Semitic myth that goes around. They're not pulling their fair share. They're the reason for the revolution. They're the reason for Marxism. And now all of the anger that's building up, all of the resentment, that's all going to be directed at them. And it's going to create one of the worst atrocities human history has ever seen. So we have finally made our way to chapter number 8. I hope I can read those Roman numerals correctly. I'm sorry if it's not 8. But this chapter is the beginning of my political activities. And this one is this is one of the more interesting chapters throughout this entire book. So he talks about how he goes back to Munich, of all places. Again, after he did serve in the Bavarian military, he still was not a German citizen. Remember, he's an Austrian citizen. So he's kind of in this weird limbo where he's a war veteran that served during the Great War. I mean, especially people at this time, that really had some weight to it. If you had fought in the war, you were somebody. People respected you. They took what you said seriously. They knew you were a fellow comrade or a patriot, for lack of a better term. So he goes back to Munich, and they had been going through a revolution. So Munich was not just Munich, but all of Bavaria. So Bavaria had become a Soviet republic, and that was just chaos. Just chaos. Because all the things that are horrible about Soviet communism, they really came to fruit there. And it happens pretty much the same way everywhere it happens. It starts that the revolution happens, the communists are in power, and they start doing what the communists do. They censor dissenting political views. It's very authoritarian in its grip. They censored free speech. They were banning people. I mean, they didn't have the gulags, but they would have if they could have. So that was just wreaking havoc across Bavaria. And when Hitler gets into politics, the big reason for this is he was just one of many reactionaries. One of many, many people who was very anti-communist and who was very nationalistic, he was probably far right before all of this happened, but when you take your staunch opposition to something that rules you, it just further radicalizes you. So the people that were in power were just far left, and whenever you have someone of one extreme in power, the people generally that are living under that regime, they swing to the other side, right? The political pendulum goes back and forth and back and forth, and the higher it goes, if you're all the way up here as a lefty, well, people are going to swing this other way. And that is exactly what happened in Bavaria and Munich especially. Because at the time, the Nazis, they were just one of many, nobody far-right political organizations. It could have been any of, maybe hundreds of them. We don't know how many there were. And that's not even getting into all the secret societies and these paramilitary organizations and just all this chaos. It was just such a crazy time. So Bavaria lived under communism for a long enough time to get a taste for it, but not enough time to have lasting damage. So enough to get that political pendulum swing, but not enough to actually quell any of the communist causes or generally left-leaning causes. I understand that communists are, to left-wingers, what Nazis are to right-wingers, right? Like, there's a clear divide of people who stand with law and morality and freedom, and then there are the radicals who want to take all that stuff away. So people were just crazy anti-communists. Whoever was the most anti-communist they were going to be the political party that kind of rose to prominence in Bavaria. And that is exactly how it went. And what's even more interesting is the fact that Hitler, he stayed in the military because, realistically, where else was he going to go? A failed artist, the dying economy. His best bet was working for the government in some capacity, and that's exactly what he did. So he's in the Bavarian military, and his job is now basically to keep track and infiltrate of potentially revolutionary groups. So the Bavarians, they really did not want another Soviet revolution. That was the big fear. Remember, everyone is basically very anti-communist in Bavaria at this point. They're like, all right, we got to stop this. Make sure that does not happen again. So this kind of creates this opportunity for Hitler with it started out as the German Workers' Party, the Deutsches Arbeiterpartei. Hitler later adds the national and socialist part of it. But they're just the German workers at this point, and they're a possibly revolutionary group. And Hitler is assigned the mission of infiltrating and reporting on these people. So he does not actually join the party because he likes their ideas. He's assigned that, part of his job in the military to go report on them. He's basically a professional narc. So he gets in there, but he actually likes what they have to say. And then he just gradually gets into it. He's like, oh, hey, wow, these guys have some pretty good ideas. And, I don't know what he actually believed at the time. I don't know if he would have found his political theories and ideas in the, where they went if it had not been for this German Workers' Party. It's anyone's guess. We can speculate about that all day. But what we can say for sure is that he probably was not a fully formed radical until he got into that party and really started finalizing and solidifying the ideas that became the Nazi Party program. And this eventually turned into a very good opportunity for Hitler, because he actually writes about the time period, and he says, quote, "We were all more or less firmly convinced that Germany could not be saved from imminent disaster by those who had participated in the November treachery. That is to say, the Center and the Social Democrats, and also that the so-called bourgeois national group could not make good the damage that had been done, even if they had the best intentions." So what's he doing here? He is delegitimizing the Center, who, they were in political power at the time, same with the Social Democrats, and they had more or less been, I wouldn't say responsible, right? I think that there were things that were out of their control that kind of forced them. I mean, how many more hundreds of thousands of Germans are you willing to let die to continue this war that you might win? And they finally, by 1918, they finally said, you know what, forget it. They said, forget it. And then, Hitler starts this whole, the November treachery, the people that are in power who were responsible for signing the defeat in World War I, they eventually there was a word for them, the November criminals. I mean, if you look at Hitler's propaganda speeches, he hits on those people a lot. The November criminals, they're gonna get what's coming to them. Of course, believe most of them get killed or concentration camped, or hopefully a good number of them fled, but it was just crazy. And what he's doing here in Mein Kampf is he's delegitimizing these two groups, which, again, there's some truth to it. There is some truth to it. And when you have propaganda and there's even just a little bit of truth to it, you can really take that inch and you can turn it into a mile. And that's what he's doing here. And then he also uses this opportunity to bash the bourgeois national groups, more or less the center right. People that are business owners, people that are, just typically your general right wingers, conservatives, more or less. And he's undermined all of them. And he's going to spend the rest of his political career delegitimizing everyone. They're fighting against the Marxists, the Social Democrats, they're evil, the centrists, they're clowns, the bourgeois national, the conservatives, they can't do anything, even if they mean well. It's up to us, the far right national socialists. And that is going to really, really become popular, particularly in Bavaria, but it's going to be some time before it gets outside of there. That is going to be it for this episode. I actually thought this was one of the better ones. Some really interesting stuff we talked about in this episode. Now, I do want you guys to let me know what you guys want me to cover after we finish Mein Kampf. I know we've still got a long way to go. We're only on page 168 out of 525. Good Lord. But I do want to be thinking about what I'm going to cover next. So let me know if you want me to cover Hitler's Table Talks, if you want me to cover maybe something philosophical, whatever it is, maybe some other political writings. You guys just let me know, and I'll do it. I really will. I'm just crazy like that. So anyway, I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. Again, if you guys want bonus content, you want your name on the big screen, you can head on over to patreon.com/HistoryforThinkers. You guys are all welcome there. There's a whole bunch of great stuff you can get over there. So check it out. A link will be in the description. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been History for Thinkers, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.